In the gaslit exhibition halls of the 19th century Europe, crowds gathered not to admire art or marvel at science. Instead, they came to gawk at a human being, displayed like an animal in a cage. They stared, they pointed, driven by their twisted curiosity about a young woman. Her only crime? Having a body that didn't fit European ideals. The story of Sarah Baartman isn't just about her tragic life. It showcases how science, entertainment, and racial bias can come together to destroy a person in the most humiliating way. What happened to Sarah is one of the most shocking examples of human exploitation in history. Her body was treated as a product, and her humanity was wiped away for profit and phony science. Her story makes us face the uncomfortable truths about how European society justified the dehumanization of Black people, all under the mask of scientific study and public amusement. This is more than just an old story. It's an open wound in our collective memory, a reminder of how easily human dignity can be torn apart when prejudice meets opportunity. In the early 1800s, European colonialism was peaking, stirring up an unquenchable thirst for the exotic and the primitive. During this time, scientific racism gained traction, with top scholars trying to sort humans into a hierarchy that conveniently placed white Europeans at the top. It was a time when human zoos were seen as educational, where indigenous folks were kidnapped and displayed as curiosities. The gap between science and spectacle had nearly vanished. In this toxic climate, Africa wasn't seen as a land of rich cultures, but as a dark wilderness filled with beings living somewhere between animal and human. The Khoi people of South Africa, with their unique features, were particularly fascinating to European anthropologists and showmen. Their traditional lives, their language, even their bodies became fodder for a European audience eager to feel superior. Cape Town, in the early 1800s, was a harsh melting pot of cultures. Dutch colonizers had established a stronghold that would eventually lead to the brutal oppression of apartheid against the Khoi people. When Europeans arrived, they destroyed traditional lands, wiped out populations through disease and violence, and turned proud communities into servants. It was in this grim situation that Sarah Baartman was born in 1789 in South Africa. The idea of putting humans on display for entertainment wasn't brand new, but in the 1800s, it exploded. Freak shows, ethnographic exhibitions, and human zoos became all the rage in Europe and America. These shows entertained the public and reinforced racial hierarchies that justified colonialism and slavery. People could watch these specimens and feel superior, believing they were witnessing their own evolutionary rise. What made these exhibitions even worse was how they pretended to be scientific. Anthropologists and naturalists attended, taking measurements and making observations, turning racist gawking into so-called academic study. This fake science gave moral cover to what was really human trafficking and exploitation. Universities, museums, and learned societies backed these dehumanizing practices, legitimizing what we now see as horrifying. Sarah's life changed drastically due to colonial violence. Her father was killed in a raid by Dutch colonizers aiming to grab Khoi land and cattle. Like many women from her community, she was forced to work for a Dutch farmer named Peter Tezzer near Cape Town. Here, her fate took a tragic turn. The details about how Sarah left South Africa are unclear, but she was convinced by Hirik Caesar, maybe a relative of her employer, and a British ship doctor named Alexander Dunlop to travel to England. They promised her riches and fame as a performer, painting a tempting picture that seemed like a way out of her life of servitude. Whether she truly agreed or was pressured remains a painful mystery in her story. Sarah had a genetic trait called steatopygia, common among certain communities, that would seal her fate. Khoi women often have larger amounts of fat on their buttocks. To Europeans, who have their own beauty standards, this difference seemed strange and exotic. Alongside features like elongated labia, Sarah Baartman's body became a way for Europeans to project their fears, desires, and unfounded theories about race. When Sarah arrived in London in 1810, she was put on display right away at 225 Piccadilly Street. The exhibition was promoted like a sideshow attraction. They called her the Hottentot Venus, using a derogatory term for the Khoi people, all while ironically referring to a goddess of love and beauty. For just 2 shillings, Londoners could enter a room to see Sarah standing on a platform, in tight, flesh-colored clothing that highlighted her figure while pretending to uphold modesty. The spectacle was carefully set up to maximize both profit and Sarah's humiliation. She was told to walk back and forth, turning so everyone could get a good look. People poked and prodded her like she was an animal at a market. Sometimes she wore traditional clothing, face paint, and beads, performing a version of African culture that entertained her white audience and reassured them of their own superiority. Contemporary accounts speak of the horror of these exhibitions. Spectators reached out to touch her, especially her buttocks, treating her like public property. She was made to dance and sing in her native language, not as a cultural showcase, but to reinforce ideas of her being primitive. Her handlers offered commentary about her supposed abnormalities, speculating on where she fit in the so-called Great Chain of Being that placed civilized Europeans above others. These London shows stirred up controversy, even for that time. Abolitionist groups, who were already fighting against slavery, saw these exhibitions as another type of human bondage. The African Association took legal action, claiming Sarah was being held against her will and mistreated. The case focused on whether Sarah was participating willingly, a cruel irony since a black woman in 1810 London had little real choice or legal rights. Sarah was told to act like she was okay with everything, that she was making money and could leave whenever she wanted. The court, wanting to avoid the bigger issues, accepted her claims at face value. The shows went on, just changed a bit to dodge accusations of indecency. Sarah's fate was sealed. The law thought it was her choice, not a problem with the system. After the drama in London, her managers took her to Paris in 1814, thinking it would be a better place. But if London was harsh, Paris was even worse. Here, she fell under the control of a showman named Rowe, who put her on display alongside wild animals. The dehumanization was complete. In Paris, things hit a new low. Sarah was shown off nearly naked, wearing just a tiny apron. The French audience, even more eager than the British, rushed to see the Hottentot Venus. She had to perform in fancy salons and shabby sideshows. People from all walks, from fancy aristocrats to scholars, examined her, seeing her as proof of their theories on race. Among those interested was Georges Cuvier, a notable naturalist. To him and his peers, Sarah was not a person but a specimen to study. They took precise measurements, sketched her, and wrote notes that stripped her of her humanity. The constant displays and their cruel treatment took a toll on her health. To cope, Sarah turned to alcohol, maybe the only escape from her disgraceful life. Reports from that time say she became withdrawn, her performances robotic, with the light in her eyes fading as she realized there was no way out, no returning home, no end to her daily humiliation. By late 1815, her health had drastically declined. Years of exploitation, poor living conditions, and dependence on alcohol had destroyed her body. She passed away in December, on the 29th of 1815, around the age of 26, though no one really kept track of her age, much like the rest of her life. Sarah Baartman passed away. The official cause was listed as an inflammatory disease, maybe pneumonia or tuberculosis, but in reality, she died because of Europe's cruelty. Even in death, Sarah found no dignity or peace. Just hours after she died, a man named Cuvier claimed her body for science. He performed a detailed autopsy, zeroing in on the parts of her body that had been sexualized during her life. He took her brain and genitals, preserving them in jars of formaldehyde. He even made a plaster cast of her body and set up her skeleton for display. Every pain she endured in life was amplified in death. Cuvier's report to the French Academy of Sciences became one of the most disgraceful documents in anthropology. He described Sarah's body in graphic detail, comparing her to apes, suggesting she was a missing link between humans and animals. He fixated on her genitals, presenting them in a way that revealed more about European obsessions than any real science. His findings only reinforced racist stereotypes, providing a so-called scientific reason to keep oppressing African people. For the French scientific community, showcasing Sarah's remains became a point of pride. Her skeleton was put on display at the Musée de l'Homme in Paris, where it stayed until 1974. Her brain and genitals, floating in jars, were studied by generation after generation of anthropologists. Each examination added to the exploitation that began in London and Paris, turning a woman into an object lesson in European racism. For over 150 years, Sarah Baartman's remains were owned by the French government, displayed like oddities that supposedly illustrated African inferiority. Visitors at the museum looked at her bones, reading descriptions that labeled her as a specimen of the Hottentot race. Her preserved organs were examined by scientists who continued to support the racial theories that justified her exploitation. In death, she became what her exploiters had tried to make her in life, not a person, but a thing. Sarah's story wasn't just a personal tragedy, it shaped how the world viewed black women's bodies. They were seen as exotic, hypersexual, and up for grabs. This harmful view influenced everything, from colonial policies to today's pornography, creating lasting harm to how black women are seen and treated. The flawed scientific racism that came from studying Sarah's body helped justify colonialism, slavery, and even apartheid. The belief that African bodies were different, mostly primitive, and less human gave intellectual support for centuries of exploitation. Every measurement taken, every conclusion reached, became a tool for those who wanted to uphold racial hierarchies. In many ways, her body was turned into a weapon against her own people. In the 1980s, as the anti-apartheid movement grew, efforts started to bring Sarah Baartman's remains back to South Africa. Activists, scholars, and poets worked hard to reclaim her story. They transformed her from a victim into a symbol of resistance. They argued that keeping her remains on display in Paris was an ongoing act of colonial violence. At first, the French scientific community pushed back, insisting Sarah's remains were important artifacts for all humanity. This idea that a woman's stolen body could be treated as universal property showed how little attitudes had shifted since her exploitation. It took years of diplomatic pressure, public campaigns, and the collapse of apartheid before France finally agreed to return her remains in 2002, nearly 200 years after her death. Sarah Baartman finally came home. The South African government set up a state funeral, drawing thousands who came to honor a woman, symbolizing all those wronged by colonialism and racism. She was laid to rest in the Eastern Cape, close to where she was born, in a ceremony aimed at restoring the dignity that had been taken from her during her life and even after her death. The impacts of Sarah Baartman's exploitation are still felt today. The sexualization of black women, the view of African features as exotic oddities, and the misuse of pseudoscience to back up racism all have roots tracing back to her tragic story. The treatment Sarah endured serves as a stark reminder of how easily we can overlook human dignity when money and prejudice come together. Modern scholars are working to reclaim her story, moving past just seeing her as a victim. They found bits of evidence showing her moments of resistance, times when she refused to perform and asserted her humanity, even in degrading situations. These snippets remind us she wasn't just a victim, she was a woman who held on to her dignity against all odds. The battle to bring Sarah back home has also changed how museums and scientific institutions handle human remains. Her case set important standards about who owns bodies, the ethics of displaying them, and the rights of indigenous peoples to reclaim their ancestors. Museums around the globe have had to face their collections of human remains, many acquired through exploitative means. Now, educational programs in South Africa and beyond include Sarah Baartman's story as a vital part of colonial history and human rights lessons. Her experiences show how racism, sexism, and scientific exploitation intersect in painful ways that still matter today. Students exploring her story wrestle with issues of consent, dignity, and how knowledge can be twisted into a tool of oppression. The way Sarah's body was commodified foreshadowed today's exploitations, from human trafficking to the objectification of women of color. The same attitudes that allowed 19th century Europeans to profit from her still linger, just transformed into new forms. Her story urges us to recognize that the fight for human dignity continues. The forces that shattered her life haven't vanished. They've simply morphed. Artists, writers, and performers have drawn inspiration from Sarah's story, channeling their anger into creativity. They've crafted works that imagine her inner life, giving voice to her silence, and restoring her from object to subject. These artistic efforts do what her exploiters never could. They acknowledge her as a fully human being with dreams, fears, and desires that exist beyond the cruel gaze of her captors. The academic community has also had to face its role in Sarah's exploitation. Anthropology, as a field, has taken a hard look at itself, recognizing how its early figures misused their power and authority. Modern anthropologists are trying to fix the harm done by racism. They're creating ethical guidelines that focus on the dignity and rights of the individuals they study. Sarah Baartman's burial site has become a place where people come to pay their respects and think about the harsh history she represents. Her simple grave stands in sharp contrast to the fancy displays that once showcased her in Paris. Here, she rests not as the Hottentot Venus, but as a woman of the Hoi Hoi people who deserved far more from society. Today, conversations about Sarah often revolve around who gets to share her story. How do we honor her memory without repeating the exploitation she faced? These questions aren't easy to answer, but they make us think deeply about histories of trauma and resilience. The return of Sarah's remains set off wider movements for repatriation in places once colonized. Indigenous groups from Australia to the Americas see her case as a path to reclaim their ancestors kept in Western museums. Her homecoming became a symbol of decolonization, of reclaiming what was wrongfully taken, reminding us that some things should never have been treated as possessions. International law has changed, in part due to cases like Sarah's. New guidelines now address how to handle human remains, the rights of indigenous peoples, and the ethics of scientific inquiry. While these protections came too late for Sarah, they offer hope for future generations, aiming to prevent similar violations. In today's digital world, sharing Sarah's story presents new challenges. Online images of her exploitation can spread without proper context, potentially causing more harm. Educators and activists strive to make sure her story is told in a respectful way, celebrating her humanity instead of sensationalizing her pain. Museums that once displayed human remains as oddities have changed their approaches, finding new ways to educate without exploiting. The empty cases that once held Sarah's remains remind us of what was lost and what has been regained. These spaces encourage us to reflect on the violence involved in collecting and displaying, highlighting the human cost of European enlightenment. Some scholars argue that Sarah Baartman's story reveals profound truths we must confront. At the core of modern life lies a kind of violence. The same drive for scientific advancement also allowed for her exploitation. Despite Europe's pride in its rational thinking, it was used to justify brutal acts. Sarah Baartman's body became a canvas, revealing the contradictions in European society. The debate over reparations for injustices like hers is still hotly contested. How do we gauge the debt for a life taken, for generations of hurt, and for the lasting impacts of scientific racism? Money alone can't mend these wounds, but discussing it forces us to confront the legacies of exploitation. Sarah's story is woven into broader discussions about African feminism and the unique struggles that Black women face under overlapping systems of oppression. Scholars and activists highlight her experiences to shed light on ongoing battles, showing how the same forces that harmed her are still at play today. Her transformation from a person to a specimen to a symbol reveals the brutal nature of categorization. Each label, like Hot Venus or Specimen, took away more of her humanity. Recognizing this process helps us see how language can be a tool of oppression, shaping the realities we live in. Efforts to memorialize Sarah Baartman continue to grow beyond her final resting place. There are calls for museums, educational centers, and public art dedicated to her memory, aiming to educate future generations. These projects must navigate the fine line of remembering without repeating the past's exploitation, honoring her story without turning her into another spectacle. The scientific data collected from Sarah, the measurements, observations, and conclusions, still exists in archives around the world. Scholars debate the fate of this information. Should we destroy it as tainted, or keep it as proof of science's dark side? This dilemma shows how the past still influences our present ethical choices. Contemporary artists engaging with Sarah's narrative often focus on imagining her inner life, the thoughts and feelings that her captors never recorded. These imaginative works provide a form of justice, affirming her humanity in ways historical records cannot. They remind us that she was always more than what was done to her. The tourism industry in South Africa has. We had to figure out how to weave Sarah's story into our discussions. Her grave attracts people from all over the globe, raising tough questions about dark tourism and exploiting historical pain. Local communities are striving to make sure any money made from this interest stays with them, not with outside opportunists. Legal experts point to Sarah's situation when talking about bodily rights and the struggles of marginalized groups. Since she couldn't truly give her consent due to the power imbalance against her, it sheds light on ongoing debates about choice and coercion. Her story highlights how what seems like consent can hide deeper exploitation. The institutions involved, from the courts that claimed she was participating willingly to the museums that displayed her remains, show how systemic oppression works. There wasn't just one villain who harmed Sarah Baartman. Instead, entire systems worked together to exploit her. Recognizing this is vital for tackling similar issues today. Psychological studies have seen the trauma Sarah faced, as well as the trauma experienced by all those who witnessed or took part in her humiliation. Reducing people to mere objects creates damage that affects whole societies. Healing from this trauma means understanding its depth and how long it lasts. The money made from Sarah's display, through ticket sales and academic careers built on studying her, highlights how capitalism plays a role in human exploitation. Her body made profits for everyone but her, and that pattern is still seen today. Understanding these economic drivers is key to stopping future exploitation. Faith leaders have found in Sarah's story deep questions about human dignity and justice. How could a so-called Christian society do such terrible things? What does it mean to restore dignity to someone so thoroughly violated? These reflections enrich ongoing efforts to honor her memory. The international aspect of Sarah's exploitation, from South Africa to London to Paris, shows how racism crosses boundaries. Her story isn't just tied to one country. It speaks to the global realities of white supremacy and colonial violence. This worldwide connection makes her story relevant to current struggles against injustice. Today, forensic anthropologists around the world are facing a tough truth about their field's past, which is rooted in the kind of harmful beliefs that were used against Sarah Baartman. New ethical guidelines are pushing for consent, working with her descendants, and recognizing that human remains aren't just data, they are ancestors who deserve respect. There's a noticeable silence surrounding Sarah's real thoughts and feelings, raising questions about which voices get remembered and which get silenced. Historians trying to piece together her life grapple with records that detail everything about her body but almost nothing about her mind. This lack of insight still affects the stories we can tell about her. When it comes to teaching Sarah's story, educators face a delicate task. They want to highlight historical trauma without re-traumatizing students, especially Black women who might see their own experiences reflected in her. The focus has shifted to encouraging critical thinking, providing emotional support, and linking past injustices to those we still see today. A key question remains: who truly owns history? Who gets to tell it, interpret it, and profit from it? Sarah's story has been co-opted by various groups for differing aims, raising vital issues about cultural ownership and memory politics. Environmental historians link her experiences to larger patterns of extraction and exploitation. Just as her body was exploited for profit, so were the lands and resources of Africa by those same colonial forces, highlighting the broader scope of colonial violence. With the rise of social media, Sarah's story now has new platforms, but that comes with the risk of further exploitation. While viral posts can raise awareness, they can also turn her suffering into a spectacle. Digital activists are working hard to ensure her story is shared in a way that informs, not sensationalizes. Comparing Sarah's experience to other forms of human exhibition like P.T. Barnum's shows, or today's reality TV shows us what makes her case unique, and where ongoing patterns of exploitation still exist. In the field of museum studies, Sarah's story has led to a transformation in how sensitive histories and materials are handled. Her legacy continues in institutions that now prioritize thoughtful approaches to telling stories like hers. We need to think more carefully about what stories we tell and whose dignity we protect. Literary scholars dive into how Sarah's story has been shared and reshaped over time. They look at the ways she's been portrayed, either as a human being or an object. These studies show us that storytelling can be an act of justice or injustice, depending on who's telling it and for what purpose. Sarah's story serves as both a source of inspiration and a cautionary tale in the fight for racial justice. It highlights how bad racism can get when it's allowed to thrive, but it also reminds us that justice can happen, even if it takes time. Sarah has become a symbol of suffering and strength. Today, medical ethics classes often include her case to illustrate how medical and scientific power can be misused. Her story teaches future healthcare workers about the importance of consent, dignity, and cultural respect. It's a warning about how healing professions can sometimes cause harm instead. The idea of restorative justice has been applied to Sarah's case, asking how we can truly repair the damage done to her and her community. While we can't bring her back, honoring her memory, educating others about her struggle, and working to prevent similar exploitation can help heal collectively. Now, many international human rights guidelines see the violations she faced as crimes against humanity. Her experience helped shape principles of human dignity that, although too late for her, can protect others from similar treatment. Posthumously, she stands as a guardian of these rights. The brave actions of those who fought to bring Sarah back home, from South African activists to compassionate French officials, remind us that justice needs allies, no matter race or nationality. Their efforts showcase how global solidarity can push back against deep-seated oppression. Current conversations about artificial intelligence and digital humanities bring up new questions about Sarah's legacy. With algorithms trained on biased history, old prejudices can resurface in new ways. Her story teaches us that if we aren't careful, technology can continue age-old injustices. Rather than just mourning what happened to her, many have turned that grief into action. Activists and scholars have transformed their outrage into real changes in laws and policies. Sarah Baartman's suffering has not been for nothing. It has led to real changes. Young people who learn about her often ask tough questions. How did this happen? Why didn't anyone step in? What would I have done? These questions push us to think about our own role in today's systems of oppression and what we can do to fight against them. When we talk about Sarah, we often use botanical metaphors. She was taken from her homeland, displayed like a rare flower, and kept like a pressed specimen. These images show how colonialism treated people as mere resources. The words we choose, matter. They shape how we see and continue oppression. Scholars who study disability look at how Sarah's story intersects with the history of showcasing bodily differences as strange or exotic. Her experience highlights a trend of turning physical differences into entertainment and denying full humanity to those who don't fit into narrow norms. Then there's the question of who benefits from remembering the past. In Sarah's case, it's essential to ensure that any recognition from sharing her story goes to the right communities, not to those looking to exploit it. Climate change adds urgency to this effort. It threatens the land where Sarah was born and buried. Environmental destruction erases indigenous ties to the land, making the fight for climate justice part of the fight for human dignity. Using Sarah Baartman's real name, Sacha, is a powerful act of resistance. Each time we remember her by the name her captors gave her, we take part in her objectification, but using her true name reclaims her humanity. Universities that once taught the racist ideas justifying her exploitation now offer classes that explore how knowledge can oppress. Her story helps students learn to question not only what they're taught, but also how that knowledge is created and used. While apologies for Sarah's treatment have been made, they raise important questions about what institutions owe and the limits of gestures. Acknowledgement is important, but true justice needs real changes in how institutions work, who holds power, and which stories are told. Studies have clearly disproven the racist ideas that Cuvier and others pushed using Sarah's body. Science itself has rejected those conclusions drawn from her exploitation. But the harm done in the name of those false theories still lingers. Children who go to Sarah's grave often leave flowers, drawings, and letters. Their simple acts of kindness stand in stark contrast to the cruelty she faced from adults who should have known better. These gestures spark hope for a future where such exploitation becomes unimaginable. Sarah Baartman's story asks us a tough question. What kind of people do we want to be? Do we become part of systems that turn people into objects, or do we take a stand? Do we turn a blind eye to exploitation, or do we act? Her life and death compel us to answer these questions, an urgency that hasn't faded over time. The fight for justice in Sarah's case goes on, even beyond her return home. Every time her story is told with respect, every student who learns from her experience, and every institution that changes its ways marks a small victory against the forces that harmed her. Her legacy lives on in every act of resistance against dehumanization. As we leave Sarah Baartman's story, we carry the weight of history and the duty of remembering. She was someone's daughter, perhaps a sister, or a friend, a young woman with dreams and aspirations we can never fully know, because those documenting her life only cared about her body. The tragedy isn't just what was done to her, but what was erased, the sound of her laughter, the things that brought her joy, and the future she could have shaped for herself. Her story serves as a lasting reminder against any system that treats people as less than human. In a world still grappling with racism, sexism, and the commodification of bodies, Sarah Baartman remains painfully relevant. She teaches us that dignity is non-negotiable, that no scientific or economic gain justifies treating people like things. It's crucial to acknowledge the wounds of history, but we must also actively work to heal them. Perhaps what's most chilling about Sarah's story is how normal it all seemed to those who exploited her. Respected scientists, cultured aristocrats, and everyday citizens didn't see anything wrong with putting a woman on display like an animal. This banality of evil warns us to reflect on our own acceptance of the normalized injustices around us. The cruel ways we exploit people for entertainment show the human price we pay for our choices today. When we say Sarah Baartman's name, we bring her back to life in a way. We acknowledge she existed, that she mattered, and that what happened to her was wrong. We vow to remember not just her pain, but also her true humanity. And by doing this, we promise to see and protect the humanity in everyone, especially those society wants to turn into a spectacle. Her grave in the Eastern Cape isn't just where she rests, it's a reminder to us all. The ground holds the weight of what people can do to each other, and what we must never let happen again. Sarah Baartman is finally home, yet her story travels across the globe. It's a constant reminder that injustice anywhere threatens humanity everywhere. In the end, Sarah's life asks us all a simple question. When you see someone treated like they're less than human, what will you do? Her spirit lingers at every exhibit, every display, every moment when profit and prejudice go against human dignity. She's watching, she's waiting, she's calling on us to do better. May we honor her memory not just with kind thoughts, but with a revolution. May her story push us towards action, helping us create a world where no one's body is ever treated like a prison, where no one's humanity is ever sold. Everyone deserves to live and die with the dignity that Sarah Baartman was robbed of. This is the justice she deserves. This is the world that her sacrifice demands we build.